Welcome and good day to you. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Amy Abel with the Conference Board, and I'm very excited to be welcoming you to this special webcast. It's part of our webcast series on the Global Leadership Forecast, which is a new research report that we have been talking about with many of our members and many of you, and the whole topic of leadership development has been evolving and has been so dynamic in our industry. So I'm very excited to having you join us for this conversation where we dig into building a coaching culture and mentoring for impact. So I'll describe a little bit more about this Global Leadership Forecast research report in a second. But before I do that, I wanted to share with you the insights that you will learn from today's webcast. Defining coaching and mentoring in your organization, which we have found can be quite a challenge. So we'll talk more about that. Benefits of building a coaching culture. Why would you want to think about this or are doing it? Impact of mentoring programs, organization practices, and stories that we hope to share with you. And those of you that are logging in for credits, you are welcome to, of course, you can see all the variety of credits that you have access to. And if you would type in your name, email address, and specify which of the credits that you are seeking, we will make that happen for this webcast. And more importantly, let me introduce to you my guest. I'm very, very excited to be introducing Stephanie Neal, who is Senior Consulting for Innovations Lab at DDI. First, that sounds really cool. So thank you, Stephanie, for joining me today on this conversation.
Hi, thanks for having me, Amy.
It's terrific. Stephanie, and you can see on the slide on the right-hand side, Stephanie and I were part of a larger research team that encompassed researchers from EY, DDI, and the Conference Board. So you can see it was a big team because this was a big research project, and all of us contributed to examining what's going on in leadership development, what are the trends that are happening globally, and what should we all think about from our own practice perspective as it relates to leadership development. So just to give you a really quick sense of this report, 2,400 global companies participated, 25,000 leaders globally. This is the largest leadership development survey and research report of its kind out there. HR professionals were involved, 50 countries, industries, generations, male to female, gender ratios we also took into account. And this loop is just another view of how we broke down the demographics, where we rated at leader levels, right, sort of the first level, mid-level, senior, and executive levels, generations, countries and regions, gender, high potential or not high potential leaders, as well as industries. So it was a big survey with a lot of people that participated. The great news about that is it gave us a lot of data points. And that's why this series, by the way, has 12 webcast series throughout the year. And each month we're coming to you with a different slice of the data because there's just so much about this report. There's no way we could cover that in a particular month or one webcast. The 6 topic areas that you see across your slide are what is covered in the full report, which all of you have access to if you go onto the website, and we'll also post that at the end. So you can we look at leadership at the core, digitization topics, diversity, cultural drivers, the HR opportunity, growth and potential. Again, the series that we have laid out for you covers all of these different aspects 1 month at a time. And today we're digging into the growth and potential, which is around coaching and mentoring. So with that, let me start first, and I'll ask Stephanie to join me, which is let's first define what coaching and mentoring means. And if your organization is like many of the organizations that we speak to, the definitions vary widely. What is coaching? What is mentoring? Do we do one? Do we do both? How do we do? All of these great questions. The only key advice that I have for you is make sure you define it clearly for your organization. What does coaching mean in your organization? What does coaching mean? What does mentoring mean in your organization? So that's actually my strongest piece of advice, is have clear definitions. But for today, let me first run through a little bit of how we define coaching. Things like coaching is more around asking questions and supporting exploration, examining, issues and challenges that you may have as a leader. It's an outside view. These days, though, you will see it's obviously not just an outside view from an external to the organization. You might have an internal coach, but it's still perhaps an outside view from your situation, and helping one get unstuck or preparing for the future is what we would look at for coaching. And what about mentoring, Stephanie?
Yeah, it's I already like how you're starting to define coaching, and of course emphasizing that yes, there are some blurred lines between these two topics, but to contrast with coaching, which I think can be very short term and immediate and more informal, mentoring is typically a longer term relationship that's focused on an individual's career development. So typically this takes the form of a more senior individual who's mentoring someone junior to themselves. So a mentor can be that someone who provides a broader perspective of what's going on in the organization and helps that junior person in their organization to get a broader perspective, understand the business better, and they can also act as an advisor to them. So because mentors are often in that position of having, better connection across the organization, they can help, make connections to other people and other resources at their organization. And they often become advocates on their mentees' behalf, which is interesting. This has actually become a really big topic in women in leadership, particularly because it helps women and other diverse candidates accelerate their careers within an organization to get more involved and make the connections that they need to really grow there. So I think that's, often, just to throw in another term that gets confusing and blended here, sponsoring, which is where we have seen a shift in there. Sometimes there's a little bit of a blurred line to when a mentor becomes a sponsor and acts as an advocate, but that does often happen in these relationships and these mentoring relationships. And coaching, on the other hand, I think, as you pointed out, Amy, it can, it can be unclear if we don't say exactly what we're meaning by that within an organization. If you do think of external coaches, often they can feel like mentors to people. So I'm just curious, is that what you were thinking as well?
Yes, and I wanted to emphasize after you finish your comments, because I know you and I debated this before we came onto this webcast, which is, everything you're saying that defines coaching might be a mentor and the reverse. And those lines are blurry, as you noted, and that's okay. We've defined it for this webcast, and again, the recommendation is that you define it very clearly for your organization, and that's what I see many executives doing. Just be clear about what is a mentor and what is a coach, and then you can develop initiatives around that. That's great. So you know what, let's go to our first polling question. So if I can ask the control room and ask all of you to join me in this polling, how strong are your leaders at your organization in coaching specifically? Our leaders are coaching rock stars. Leaders are not consistently strong, but we are actively developing their coaching skills. Coaching is one of the areas our leaders need the most development. So if all of you in the audience can just take about 10 more seconds and log in your status of coaching, if you will, for the leaders in your organization. Okay, and control room, when you're ready, if you wouldn't mind closing the terrific. So you can see, we have a pretty good split right at the last two, which is leaders are not consistently strong, but we are actively developing. And then coaching is one of the areas that our leaders need the most development in. So I don't think this would be surprising to Stephanie or myself or or probably all of us on this webcast, right? Coaching, while it has been around for a very long time, was not considered a skill that many of us thought about, especially developing all the leaders, not just the few that receive coaching. What are your thoughts on this one, Stephanie?
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the split, and I do think for sure, as you said, we're not surprised. I would have been much more surprised if 99% of you said our leaders are coaching rock stars. Our global leadership research for the last, I want to say even past 5 forecasts over the past 10 years has shown consistently that coaching is an area where leaders don't feel very confident. They feel like they can get more development. So we're definitely seeing this play out, I think, right here, which is that, there may be some strong coaches within an organization, but it probably isn't consistent across. And this is an area for development for leaders, which is, something I see a lot of organizations are starting to focus on. So Amy, I think these, are really telling results. And
Agree. So we're going to spend the next few minutes talking about coaching first, and I'll have Stephanie jump in a second on that and take us through just a couple of slides, and we'll cover mentoring after that. So we'll talk about both of these different topics. However, I was going to invite all of you to join me for this conversation by typing in your questions in your lower left-hand box, but I see a number of you have already jumped in and done that, so I'm very grateful. Thank you already for taking the initiative and joining me in this conversation, and thank you for typing in those questions. But please, all of you, feel free to do so in the lower left-hand corner, and I'll try to facilitate and take those questions for Stephanie and I to respond on. But already a number of questions coming in. Let's do one real quick one, Stephanie. And let me ask you, do you have a need for more trust with a coach or a mentor? And I wondered what your thoughts on that before you jumped into the first slide.
Oh, that's a great question. And trust is so important, I think, in both of these relationships. I think with a mentor, you really do have to trust that it's someone that you can internally, reveal a lot of information, reveal some vulnerabilities to help you to continue to grow, and of course to seek the development you may need for your career there. But I can also see on the other side of the debate that there's a lot of trust required for any coach. I think because it's a shorter term relationship, you may say, it's something you don't need the depth of trust that you might with a mentor. But because there are often coaches that can be external to your organization, you have to trust that they're going to help you. And of course, it's a lot easier to deal with challenges with an external coach, challenges that you might feel you're a little bit vulnerable talking to someone internally about. So I think trust becomes a really interesting thing to be considering, and especially, something that would be worthy of building when you're, trying to create these good coaching relationships.
Yeah, what do you think, Amy? I mean, coaching and mentoring is fundamentally about a connection or a relationship, right? A professional relationship between individuals. And how can you have any genuine level of relationship without trust, right? So there has to be, in my humble opinion, there has to be certain levels of trust in those. I don't know which one would be more or less. I'm not sure I have a strong opinion on that, other than the fact that it must be. Otherwise, how could it possibly be a genuine relationship in any regard? So that's perhaps a little bit too philosophical. Let me turn it back to you to go jump into the slides there, Stephanie.
Yeah, so as Yuri teed up, when we worked on the Global Leadership Forecast together, coaching was a definite focus and a finding of its own that I'm going to explore a little bit with you all. First, we did just want to say, obviously, many organizations are working to foster a healthy coaching culture for leaders at all levels. And the ideal is really to be integrating coaching expectations into everyday conversations. So to be thinking about coaching as more natural, as just a part of how things work. Yet we find that leaders often underestimate what they can learn from peers and employees and think of, the typical manager-coaching relationship as the default. But it's unfortunate because we're seeing very real benefits to both peer and employee coaching. And we need to make sure we draw bigger awareness of this for leaders so they can understand how to get more value out of those coaching relationships. We've seen that organizations that heavily use peer and employee coaching are actually more likely to be strongly engaged and accountable to their role as leaders versus when there isn't any coaching. So there's a real big benefit for leaders. It's also promoting a stronger sense of shared leadership at organizations that are embracing this well and increasing collaboration across the organization. So it can help really prevent silos that we know can have a negative effect and slow things down at the organization, especially the peer coaching, where leaders see partners across the organization that are helping them with their different challenges. So this can create space for dealing with those challenges, for provoking conventional thinking between leaders and their teams and between those colleagues and peers to really help, create better business benefits for everyone. And this does translate to actual organizational benefits too, including that companies with a deep coaching culture have higher bench strength. Our leadership forecast research also showed that they promote more leaders from within, and they are more likely to have a strong pipeline of leaders to fill critical leadership roles when they need leaders who are ready. So it's really, helping to create that environment that leaders learn more quickly from each other. I think that's something that often leaders may not be consciously aware of, and the more we can draw attention to that and the value of that coaching for them, the better. So I'm curious, Amy, too, some of your thoughts on this, especially if you're seeing any organizations that are doing this well and benefiting from coaching like this.
A quick question before I jump into and answer yours. The distinction between employee and peer coaching. Peer coaching is what we say that are your peers at relatively the same hierarchical levels, if you will, or titling levels, whereas employee coaching are from your teams. This is learning from those that you work with day to day. Historically, the boss knew everything and told the team everything, but now we know that we don't have all the answers, and we need to be coached even from those that report directly into us, and that's the basic distinction. For your question, Stephanie, around organizations, I do quite a bit of coaching research here at the Conference Board, and we're seeing an explosion of different types of coaching. Performance-focused coaching, development-focused coaching, transition coaching, peer coaching, group coaching, team coaching. And so the peer coaching is taking on a growth with organizations that want to offer coaching, but perhaps let's just take a group that might be lower in the organization that you're not going to invest for an external coach to be part of. So let's just say a group of first-time supervisors. Right, they were individual contributors, relatively younger in experience level, and now are supervising groups. And so you might get a peer group together for them to learn from each other, facilitated by a professional coach. So that is one example, but I see many examples of that. You mentioned developing women leaders, Stephanie. I also hear of organizations getting women high potential leaders together. And again, the peer coaching to help them overcome whatever challenges that they have. So back to you, Stephanie. I don't know if you're hearing other stories like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a good distinction to your point that you really called out about where leaders, maybe it isn't accessible to get external coaches, or maybe it's becoming a bit more accessible. I know software and technology is enabling that, to encourage a cohort of leaders to develop it, coaching, and practice it with each other is a great example of how I see organizations are starting to really employ peer coaching better and strengthening their teams and their partnerships across the organization through that. So I love that example. And do we want to go to the next slide as well? I was going to jump into a few more examples of how we're seeing this play out. It's not really a question of whether coaching is valuable. I think we know it's a must. It's something that needs to happen to help everyone learn and grow at the organization. So it's not a choice of whether coaching fits into learning plans, but really how. And in our Global Leadership Forecast study, more than 25,000 leaders weighed in about how they most want to develop and what are the methods and the learning tools that they need and really want to be more effective leaders. And what we found is that among these learning methods, there's really a gap between what learners want and what they're actually getting, and that can really be vast. So that's what this plot here is showing you. To demonstrate this, you can see that the learning types that are being most heavily used by organizations are across the bottom from left to right. So where there is less use of a certain type of learning, that's on the left, and to the right is the higher use of these different methods. So those are the different types of methods that are really being emphasized in different learning and development programs. And that's contrasted and plotted against what methods are most sought after by leaders for their own learning. So you can see from bottom to top, the types of learning that leaders want the most are appearing at the top. And you can see here that there's 5 types highlighted in orange that are those that leaders said they want more of than they're currently getting. So we call those out. Of course, anything that's about right in that middle band is leaders are getting about what they're looking for, and then below maybe they're getting a bit more than they're wanting, just in terms of what the trends across leaders showed us globally. So among these, it was interesting, we found that there were some big differences in terms of coaching, and particularly leaders indicated that they want much more external coaching than they're currently getting, which you can see all the way at the top in the orange dot. However, while they want access to more, external coaches and they're looking for more of this type of external coaching, we found that few organizations are providing this yet. So it's a big gap, and it may be one that it's just an early trend we're witnessing, and organizations are catching up to this desire and way to learn for leaders. But it's unfortunate because we've already been seeing some of the significant benefits that there can be for leaders who get access to external coaching, including a much stronger link to retention than they get with their managers and manager coaching, which is really interesting. The other two features that stood out, and which I just want to point out here, are that learners indicated they preferred much more personalized learning experiences and having access to on-demand learning. And Amy, I think these are trends that we were seeing for a while, but I thought it was really interesting to see it play out here, and the potential for coaching, and especially external coaching, really stood out to me.
Yes, I think the two big words that stood out to me were personalized and external. And the reason why I say that is that's been the whole shift, as you and I have seen, for the past number of years, right? Where leadership development, we've always done leadership development, but what's the big trends going on in leadership development initiatives and programs is that it's more personalized and customized. We provide experiences, not training for leaders. We want leaders to have experiences that develop themselves. And so that's one way for that. And what could be more personalized than a coach, right? So the fact that those two are very tightly linked does not surprise me. And the external view, I think, is also what's important, because we all live in just this crazy world. Being insular inside an organization is not going to help you as a leader, right? Things change too quickly. You need to have your pulse, your ears, your eyes on what's going on around the world as it relates to your world, your business, your leaders, your programs, etc., right? So the external view, I think, helps all of us, whether you're a business leader, HR leader, or a marketing or IT leader. So those two really resonated for me.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I do think, they're part of the issue, and I'm seeing some questions come in that relate to this too, but personalization and having access to coaches who are external to the organization may be a higher investment, and there's reasons why organizations, of course, determine if they want to do this, if they want to spread it out across the organization or to a targeted group. But just to show an example of how this external coaching is happening, and to provide kind of an overview of what happens in those external coaching relationships, because honestly, I don't think there is a lot out there about what these engagements look like. Just wanted to show a couple of ways this plays out. And here's an example 6-week coaching engagement, like what we typically employ at DDI. Coaching engagements can, of course, be longer term, and in some cases even a year or more, but we've seen a trend towards shorter targeted duration on clear development goals that a leader can action back on the job. And that's really, of course, the benefit of bringing in external coaches to amplify development quickly. And this type of coaching engagement typically will start with an orientation and goal setting for whatever the duration, in this case 6 weeks, where the leader and coach will work together to define and set the development goals that can then be actioned within the following weeks. So just to show you some examples of that there in the boxes on your screen. This might build off of assessment data or feedback that a leader has gotten and already received and can bring into the coaching engagement, or it could involve a quick diagnostic to help determine where the most developmental impact will be for this individual leader, and maybe where they can gain the most from working with a coach. So it focuses in, and then in the following weeks, the leader can continue to work with their coach to review and adjust their plan as needed, and finally wrap up with a clear set of tools and resources that they can continue to use to develop on the goals that they've set, and to identify where they can go for further support and to maximize what's been learned. And what's interesting about your comment earlier, Amy, about how this ties to personalization, an external coach like this can really act as someone who helps to personalize a development plan for a leader, and help them to find the tools that they need to really personalize their learning. So I'm curious what you think about that too, as well as if you've seen this play out or different kinds of coaching engagements.
Yes. So I was actually going to build on what you were saying from the external coach perspective, but also touch upon a series of questions that have come in around the costs of external coaching. And also, it, of course, leads me to think about internal coaching. right? So many of you may have heard internal coaching is one of the fastest growing trends that I see in my coaching research for at least the 6-8 years now. Organizations are really building their external and internal. They're not mutually exclusive, by the way. It's both. There is a growing demand for coaching, period. And yes, we can't afford to put everybody into an external coach. So what are organizations doing? And so some of your questions, thank you again for submitting those, are around, well, how do internal leaders feel about internal coaches? Well, I think many of them have been through coaching. If your leaders have an opportunity to go through a coaching engagement or coaching experience, many of them become extremely supportive of a coaching philosophy, coaching culture, coaching practices thereafter. And so we see a high growth in the use of internal coaches. And just to be clear, internal coaches are other employees within the organization that coach other internal employees. They may be more senior. They're usually from different parts of the organization, so there's no sort of, conflicts, if you will, conflicts of interest in the same organization. And some of you had talked about, well, sometimes you have internal culture issues that an internal coach may be more helpful. And yes, that is correct. So lots of reasons to go through similar processes. So the process that Stephanie laid out could also be done by an internal coach or an external coach. And again, just to emphasize, it's not mutually exclusive. Lots of organizations are absolutely doing both. So I don't know if you want to build on that, Stephanie.
Yeah, I think that's such a strong point, and it's about looking for coaching everywhere for leaders, right? I think your distinction about when, an internal coach may be more valuable, one who understands the culture and maybe even the challenges to navigate within an organization. There's definitely a reason to, push towards having an internal coach or even a mentor for that. And then to have an external view sometimes can be really valuable, especially we see it more typically senior levels where there's challenges that other, coaches or other leaders internally just may not be prepared for. That's when an external coach becomes, the value point definitely tips in the favor of getting in an external coach. But even for leaders, lower in an organization, we're seeing the value of external coaching to be that point, that safe place, an objective place where, it sometimes does make sense to go for one or the other. So it's always about thinking about the need, what's going to best prepare and set leaders up for success. And I think, the point you made, Amy, was so brilliant that it's, about evaluating what's going to provide the best value for your leaders. And if you can find that cohort internally, that's awesome. And I think it's just about preparing leaders and, of course, developing strong coaches no matter what.
And, well, I was going to say, maybe that'll take us into, well, how does one start a coaching culture?
Brilliant. Yeah, that was a great transition. So to think about where you're at in a journey, I know a lot of organizations are just starting to work towards a coaching culture. So it'll be more critical to build, kind of some of these early pieces and put some of the things that Amy and I have already been talking into place. And we know for most organizations, this is a development need for leaders, especially at the front line, but all the way up, we see that coaching skills drop off. And instead of getting better, they're maybe not getting as much practice at more senior levels, and leaders are typically not feeling like they're strong coaches at that point, or they're not being rated and reviewed as such. So it's really, unless it's something that's practiced and continue to be planned and intentional, it's really a critical effort to make sure that senior leaders are involved in these coaching development discussions as well, and that they're modeling strong coaching behaviors so that they can influence a positive coaching culture. We're seeing a lot of organizations are starting to create a focus on coaching and development programs generally. One manufacturing company that I recently worked with is rolling out a 3-week program to their high potentials, where a full week of that 3-week program is devoted to coaching, which is then complemented by providing access to external coaches. So they're building, again, that internal strong cohort as well as some external coaching relationships to help continue to build out that coaching culture. And I'm curious, Amy, is this, something that you're seeing at all, a trend towards maybe with the both, having both that internal and external, or how else are organizations kind of starting out on this journey?
Yeah, so the internal coaching, I would say, has been around for a few years longer. And the words coaching culture has been a little bit more growing and developing in recent times. And so, of course, not surprisingly, when you ask companies, well, what does that mean to you to have an organization that's focused on coaching culture? Every organization says a little bit something different. What does it mean? But what I have seen are organizations that basically incorporate coaching elements into the various talent management processes. So, for example, they may obviously integrate coaching into leadership development processes. They may integrate coaching into succession planning processes, into performance management processes, other variety of learning and development type of processes. And you can argue, I know of an organization that provides coaching for when you're exiting out retirement planning processes. So from the sort of beginning talent acquisition all the way to exiting an organization, there can be coaching elements integrated that better support the employees that you work with. And so there's lots, and that's what I see as a big push on what does it mean to have a coaching culture. It's actually integrated into what we do. We want leaders, all managers of people, to be a better coach, is another example. And what that means could be they're asking more questions. They're not telling their people what to do, their teams what to do. They're asking more questions and helping their teams discover the problems and solutions themselves. That could be another way to integrate that into the culture. And all of this, by the way, is wanting to, it's an attraction and retention tool, first of all, but it's focused on that development, right? Whether it's individual learning development, specific skill development, or career development. These are perfect for coaching practices and coaching behaviors from any leader, and it doesn't mean that you have to be at any level or any particular function. We can all coach each other as what peer coaching is meant to be. So what about other practices, Stephanie?
Yeah, so I'm so glad that you called out, of course, defining what the needs are and designing coaching around that, because we are seeing that organizations that are a bit further along, that maybe are already creating a really positive coaching culture or who want to excel in this area, we're seeing that they're designing specialized programs and coaching really targeted to different needs that can emerge in different milestones like onboarding, career and role transitions, or even focused coaching programs on specific team or D&I initiatives. And I know, Amy, you called out some of those great examples, especially when it comes to teams. I think we're seeing a focus on how coaching and how leaders can play more of that enabler and the coach of asking questions rather than, as you said, kind of the old command and control style of leadership to help enable teams to achieve their goals faster and, of course, learn more quickly. So they can accelerate change across the organization. Another great way that we're seeing organizations excel is by identifying internal coaches who can reinforce and help other leaders through organizational changes more broadly. So again, it's a really targeted internal cohort that focuses on getting through some sort of transformation or change. And also they're coordinating efforts to build a strong pool of coaches internally, spanning all levels. Again, remembering that senior leaders set the model for what will be a positive coaching culture, so it's important to involve them in that solution and make sure that they're really the champions of that effort. So just a few others. Amy, are there any other examples that you would call out, or any other good ways that you see organizations excelling?
Yeah, no, I think we've provided a number of great examples. I think, as I already briefly hinted at, the use of coaching continues to expand and grow. And it's because our leaders need that help. All industries that we talk to are undergoing severe change, chaos, lots of transition, digitization, mergers and acquisitions, etc. Our leaders are not prepared to handle that level of chaos, and they need help. And that's what I see companies doing a lot more of, helping their leaders prepare and manage and be change agents and be change leaders in the chaos in which they function day to day. Coaching happens to be one great lever and tool to make that happen. But by the way, it's not the only tool, right? It's one tool that many organizations seem to find value in that. And before we move on, I wanted to just answer a quick question that someone had asked around impact related to certified coaches versus non-certified coaches. I don't know that my research covers sort of the impact around that. What I have seen, though, are trends where, especially for external coaches, I would say you do need a certification of some, legitimate professional training of coaches. And I do see that as being more of a requirement from the companies that hire external coaches into the company. But I don't have a strong opinion as to the types of certifications, because many of you probably already know there's a lot of them out there, and many of them are very good. So I won't recommend any particular programs other than the fact that I do see the trend of companies requiring a level of certification for their professional coaches that they work with. Okay, so just in the interest of time, let me move on to the second broad topic, which is around mentoring. And before we jump into some of the content, I wanted to ask another polling question out of all of you. Have you had a formal mentor? It's a quick, simple answer. So if you wouldn't mind taking about the next 5 seconds or so and just typing in your responses. And by the way, thank you again to all of you for typing in your questions and comments in the lower left-hand corner. And I noticed some of you even talking to each other in the lower left-hand corner. So that's great, and I think that's terrific. And there's a lot of questions and a lot of depth to a lot of the content that we're providing. And the only shame is that Stephanie and I only have an hour to cover so much content. But there is a lot of questions, and we thank you for that. We're trying to cover them as best we can. All right, so for the control room, if you can close the poll. So it's actually not a big gap. It's about 56% said no, you have not had a formal mentor, and 43% or 44% of you said yes. So with that, let me show you what some of our data shows. And again, this was 25,000 leaders globally. 59% of the leaders have never had a formal mentor. So this group actually is doing a little bit better than that, but it's a high percentage. 60% essentially have never had a formal mentor, and 36% of organizations have formal mentoring programs. So that's not a high percentage. About a third of the organizations in our report have an actual formal program for mentoring. And I know many of you actually typed in some questions around mentoring, and I was holding them off just so that we can get to this mentoring part. So I'm trying to look for, so one of you had asked, well, what if there are no mentoring programs in your organization? What should one do? And a couple of you actually commented as a reply, which is, I went out and found my own mentor. There's nothing that stops any of us, and I would encourage all of us to find a mentor, people that you look up to, people that you think you can learn from. And by the way, it doesn't mean it has to be a lifelong relationship. We can have multiple mentors in our lives from different parts of our lives or different stages in our career of where that might be helpful. And you can define what that mentor could help you in. Of course, organizations are trying to do that, because if I move to the next slide, we actually found quite a bit of impact for mentoring in this Global Leadership Forecast research. So what you can see, for example, on the slide, 23% of more critical roles can be filled immediately for organizations that have a formal mentoring program. 46% have higher leader quality overall. Right? We have better leaders. We have, actually very interesting, 20% lower turnover. Right? Could it be that the folks that are getting mentored have better visibility into their career trajectory? They feel more engaged because they have somebody sort of in their corner supporting and encouraging them. Are they getting good advice around how to tackle their day-to-day problems, and therefore they're performing better? Right? These are all potential reasons that they're more engaged and more connected to the organization, and therefore lower turnover. And then certainly not in the least, you're more capable of capturing organizational knowledge before it's lost. And that could be the senior person sharing with more junior person. But the other example that Stephanie and I talked about before this webcast is around something very popular nowadays, reverse mentoring. Right? It's not always a senior, older person mentoring a younger person. We see different capabilities around the reverse of that and various reasons. So lots of different options around mentoring. And I wonder, Stephanie, if you had some examples or stories that you can share around mentoring. And I'm going to try to get to some of these questions with all of you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Amy. And I do think what you called out there about reverse mentoring is really important to consider, especially when we look at, of course, 1.7 times these organizations that have a formal mentoring culture and have leaders, more leaders than the norm, having formal mentors are more likely to capture organizational knowledge before it's lost. It makes sense, of course, that when we think of the classic mentoring, they're sharing that knowledge down into the organization and it's being retained better. But what's interesting about the reverse mentoring is it can really show that organizations are staying more in touch across the organization. And of course, senior leaders may be benefiting from learning from, millennials or employees that are younger in their organization, to helping them, stay abreast of trends and just more aware of what's going on in the organization. So there's a lot of benefit there. And I think, as you said, of course, we're seeing that play out in terms of these organizational benefits. In terms of really strong examples of organizations that are excelling at this, we're seeing it often starts with a focus on, making sure that high potential employees or those that are really targeted for advancement in the organization have a senior mentor, helping to show them the business and help them to understand maybe what they need to do to continue to have an impact across the organization. But often what it starts to transition to is realizing that mentoring is helping to break down silos, helping to make sure that they're retaining their valuable employees. So not only those high potentials, but maybe even other targeted employees that they know they really want to make feel included in the direction of the organization and, of course, supported. So I think seeing mentoring in that way has been, a big trend for organizations. And I think that's why formalizing mentoring ends up becoming, a real valuable approach versus, sure, leaders can seek out their own mentors, and definitely we're seeing a trend toward people asking more for mentoring, but that's still, not a strategic way to approach it. It's allowing people to see this as a critical component of their career success and to go after it. But for an organization to say, yes, we're going to, put this in place, and here's how we want to make sure we're strategic about it. There's a lot of organizations that are starting to do that and think about who they want to mentor for retention, for example.
And I would agree with all of that, and would add that we see a lot of attention invested in what we define as high potentials in our organization, right? These are the future leaders that will lead our organization in different ways. And that might be coaching to help them along, or it might be mentoring. And, we've talked earlier in the program about the blurring of the two. I know of organizations that would have both. You could be assigned, if you will, a coach and a mentor. So I'll let you ponder that a while into what is the value, what is the purpose, and why would an organization take an effort to do that. Now, some of you may have current existing mentoring programs in your organization, or you've run mentoring programs. I've also designed mentoring programs in my past, and they're troublesome. They can be troublesome, right? Meaning, how often do they meet, and what do they talk about, and what if the pair dynamics doesn't work? And we have a lot of challenges. In fact, Stephanie and I wrote a blog about the Me Too movement in recent news, and is that impacting mentoring, especially for the women leaders that need it in some way? So lots of potential challenges and issues, but does not override the need for it, does not override the goal that we should still perhaps have one, or have some level of mentoring, because you can see on the slide, there's critical and direct business impact to having one. And there is a enhancement to your leaders and an enhancement to your organization for companies that do have a mentoring program. So that's the challenge for all of us, right? How to overcome some of those challenges and implement programs and initiatives around mentoring that may be feasible, easy, and sort of effective for the people that are involved. I don't know, Stephanie, I wonder what your thoughts on some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's again, how do you start this journey? How do you set up a formal mentoring program that's going to be successful? Because I do think all the challenges you called out are often, concerns that organizations have, and I know you're going to cover a few of these. One thing that I just wanted to point out is what we saw in the forecast really broke some conventional thinking about where mentors tend to happen. I think we assume that everybody that makes it to the top has had a mentor to get them there, because we have heard a lot of, success stories where people credit their mentors. But interestingly, we found even though we saw about 40% of leaders only about 40% had a mentor, senior leaders, it really wasn't much better further up. And I think the stat was only 47% of senior leaders have said that they've even had a mentor. So at organizations that aren't doing something to take first steps with whatever group they want to focus on and target with, and then try to, of course, build this out to make sure they're not missing opportunities to include different leaders in that mentoring program, I think we can see it's not necessarily going to happen organically, completely on its own. And of course, if senior leaders aren't mentoring or haven't had a mentor, how will they know to take that step and even try to themselves establish those mentoring relationships? So it's about showing the value for that mentoring. And Amy, I'll pitch it back to you because I know you have some great points to make about that.
I think we can reasonably argue that all of us can benefit from having a mentor in our lives, and would certainly encourage all of us to actively seek and find some. And I know there's also research out there, because we've covered, sort of some of the gender aspects of mentoring a little bit on this webcast. There is research that shows, for example, in the Fortune 500, the women that are CEOs in the Fortune 500, all of them, and two of them we've interviewed, specifically called out that they got there, and one of the reasons is because they had mentors. And they didn't say one mentor, they had different mentors. So those of us that are seeking to be leaders, regardless of our gender, how do we think about that? And how do we go out and find that? Now, if the organization provides that level of program, initiative, and facilitation, that's even better, and that's great. We should sort of sign up and make time for that, which is always a challenge. But if it's not available, how do we go about finding that, doing that? And what is it that we think we can gain from that? And being very intentional about that type of development, because I think that self-directed development is what a lot of us need in this world today. There's just too much going on. There's too much chaos, and organizations are struggling and doing their best. I'm sure many of you are putting together these fabulous programs, but there's many of us that are thinking, well, what else can we do to supplement? How can we also help ourselves? And so these are, I think, great questions. For the Mentoring for Impact, where we have I have 2 slides around where to start. Initiate formal mentoring to foster guided interactions, right? And this is your formal mentoring program, where you may have light guidelines around what to expect, what to do, how do you match people up, things like that. But we would also encourage you to foster informal mentorships. And it could be, reverse mentoring. It could be amongst peers. It could be, different ways to express that willingness that we want individuals in this organization to informally mentor each other or seek out. I've actually known of also organizations where senior leaders are part of their performance assessment is who they're mentoring and how are they bringing more junior leaders up in the organization. And that often, by the way, can be connected to formal succession planning processes, right? They're actually assessed on how well they're pulling up people in the organization. And that's a great way to look at that. And then more to excel and differentiate in internal for mentoring is you can have internal mentoring networks. What if you created a space where you sort of formally create a space, but then informally they match themselves or find each other somehow in that space of that network? And we're very digital these days, so lots of this activity may happen online. And many of you may know that coaching engagements often and historically have been one-on-one, face-to-face interactions, but we find many examples now of organizations where internal coaches and external coaches will coach virtually, whether it's through video and Skype examples, or old-fashioned telephone, or even just sort of FaceTime on their cell phones and things of that nature. So lots of ways to facilitate all of that. And then, as we had said earlier, the retention and the turnover rate is a huge business impact. There's plenty of research that shows the replacement cost of a new employee. And so how are you reducing that risk by having a stronger retention strategy, and is mentoring one of that? So I wondered if you had anything to add to that, Stephanie.
Yeah, I like that you called out, of course, that, coaching has typically been these individual relationships, but it really is about building the connection beyond, just those individuals. So I love, thinking about how technology can enable this, and how we can, of course, help connect more people across the organization in a way to enable not only mentoring, but a better coaching culture. So I thought that was an awesome call out, Amy.
And I'm seeing a whole lot of your questions and comments from the audience. So first, thank you. I see you helping and coaching each other. So I think that's awesome on our coaching webcast. I don't see too many other questions in terms of, a couple of the questions around how do we get access to the report, which I believe our webcast team has responded. So thank you very much. Lots of different ways to think about it. There's lots of tools, lots of approaches. There's no limit to how we can use coaching and mentoring in our organizations for leadership development. And again, it's not the only tools. It happens to be some very prominent ones because of the trends that we talked around about personalization and customization. So I think the challenge to all of us, if you are in HR or not in HR doing leadership development work, is we're only limited by our creativity. How can we continue to think about thoughtfully and intentionally to create these experiences that our leaders will find impactful and thoughtful in the fact that it perhaps pushes them to learn a little bit? I'll give you an example where I've been working with a number of healthcare organizations and hospital systems, and they have brilliant doctors on their staff that are leaders of their specific functions, leaders of oncology or radiology, pediatrics, etc. And their challenge is not that they need better doctors. They already have better doctors. Their challenge is they need their doctor leaders now to be change agents, to lead and engage their teams, to lead and sort of overcome the chaos, but in a reasonable and an engaging manner with their staff, and of course with their patients. Right? And how do you do all of this? They have implemented coaching and mentoring as some ways to take on this challenge because it's so complex and so challenging. And these are already really, really, really smart people. And how else can we help them understand and prepare them for the changes and the chaos that they need to deal with today in their business environment? So just another plug to think about different ways to use the coaching and mentoring. And Stephanie, I don't know if you had any last thoughts around that as well.
Yeah, I think it is so important to be thinking about, as you said, the different challenges that leaders are facing, what they may be, and how coaching or how even mentoring may differentially help them face those challenges. So I think the example that you shared about what's kind of the impact of these challenges in healthcare and how it's creating a different need exemplifies that perfectly. We're also seeing that, I think, across, all industries in many ways, just faced with different disruption, where leaders need to have someone often external to go to face the new challenges that maybe others in their organization haven't yet faced, or even more senior leaders aren't familiar with. So I think thinking about the need for how we can support our leaders, how we can best prepare them to deal with those challenges. It's just a different way of thinking about coaching and mentoring that maybe we've had to in the past. And certainly we see the need is strong there, and the desire for leaders to have more coaching is very high. So the time really isn't better.
Yes, no, I agree. And as I said, the coaching practice, if you will, has only grown and will continue to grow. I do not see any slowdown in the application and use of coaching. So this is great news for all of us that are interested simply in developing leaders. Right? It's a great time to be in leadership development. I would encourage all of you to continue doing great work in this space because the leaders need it, the companies need it. And it's our job to figure out how to do this, but it doesn't mean we do it all in the same ways that we've always done it. Right? And one last thought that I'll challenge all of you with is the measuring the impact of leadership development, measuring the impact of coaching and mentoring. And you can see from this study, we've got some numbers and measuring around that, but organizations are continuing to demand and ask all of us that do this work, how do you show that impact in some measuring and monitoring, tracking kind of way? And I don't mean that you have to have an ROI number. I know we've been down that path and journey in the past, but it's not so much the ROI, it's the how do you demonstrate and show the value and impact. And that continues to be a challenge for many of us. So I would sort of close out with that last thought of we need to continue down that journey so that we can demonstrate and show value and impact of these initiatives. Even though our organizations continue to invest, we need to be able to show that. And many organizations, by the way, are working very hard on this and doing really interesting work. So that, again, is only limited by our imagination. We can keep doing that. And I think, let's see, I had a last question around, and maybe just the last question for you, Stephanie. How would cultural intelligence benefit in coaching and mentoring? I wondered if you have 2 seconds on thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do think, again, it's about thinking where we can help, break down maybe some barriers, in this case, maybe some cultural barriers, or help leaders be connected to leaders that are in other places than them, in different places and from different cultures than them. So I think it is a great point to be thinking about how it can really expand cultural intelligence by providing these relationships. Of course, if it's a coach that even helps a leader to think through their experiences, if they've had international experiences, where maybe they're growing a stronger awareness and, of course, a stronger understanding of how to best engage with others. And I think, we've seen a lot of great examples already and a lot of great ways that organizations are using coaching and mentoring creatively for this. It's just a great additional angle for us to consider.
Yes, and it, by the way, it doesn't have to be, cultural intelligence can be learned in different ways, not just through coaching and mentoring, but we do see interesting applications, and it ultimately depends on the need, right? You have to look at the need of that leader to figure out what's the best way. We do not recommend using one application for all types of needs. That just doesn't make sense, and that it's sort of against that customization and personalization approach, right? Think of the tactics, the approaches, and the methods and the tools that are most suited and best suited for the need that the leader has. Okay, great. Just in the interest of time, I wanted to invite all of you. Well, first, actually, before I do that, let me really thank Stephanie. Thank you, Stephanie, for a very lively conversation with me. I think we tried to cover a lot in a very short period of time, so I thank you for that.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Amy. Thanks for having me.
No, it's great. Before we finish off, again, I wanted to invite all of you to next month's Global Leadership Webcast, Global Leadership Forecast webcast, Rethinking Leadership Potential, Making the Most of High Potential Talent. So continuing on this topic of leadership development, there was a great deal of data around high potentials. And let me give you the hint of, we all do high potentials, but no one's happy with them. What does this mean to all of us? So I'll leave you in that teasing comment of how you can learn more about what our research found on a high potential program. And so come join us next month on that one. And I also want to thank all of you for probably one of the liveliest chat boxes that I've had in these webcasts in the number of years that I've been working at the conference board. I really thank you for that. It's been terrific to see the level of engagement, and I really appreciate and will reflect upon many of the comments that many of you offered. So again, I'm Amy Abel with the conference board. Thank you again for taking the time to join us.